Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is, of course, the Friday weekend edition, and we're going to be talking about so many things that I am convinced we will not cover them all. We have a very long list of articles we've posted, and then just added another one because Dr. Merrill Matthews' piece just came out in The Hill just a few minutes ago, so we'll see if we can get that one up there before we're done. And since we broadcast right now, primarily in the state of Texas, I'll talk about that, but since we also have listeners in places like Minnesota, I'll use that as a starting point. The last time a Republican won in Minnesota was, I believe, 1984. No, actually, before that, because you have to recognize that in 1984, that's right, Walter Mondale only won that state. So you have to go even further back than that. So that is interesting that Republican candidates are going to Minnesota. But since we're also talking about Texas, the last time I'm thinking that you had a Democrat win in the state of Texas for the presidency, Jimmy Carter was running. So in some respects, I've got to go around the round table here because we got this one. Texas could deliver political earthquake. The argument that indeed some people, at least in the Democratic campaign, and some people with the Biden-Harris campaign believe that Texas is in play because just down the road, Kamala Harris is actually going to be speaking in Fort Worth. So, Kelly, I'm sure you got a few thoughts about this.
This stuff just gets so old. I know that one day Texas is going to turn. I mean, the demographics are moving Texas, with the Hispanic population, are moving Texas to where they would be Democrat someday. But these predictions are so ridiculous. I mean, last time, I don't know if everybody remembers in Texas, last time Texas was in play. And Trump won by 9 points. Okay? I mean, it's so ridiculous that, them talking about this. And it's all this hopeful. Part of it's the polling is all screwed up now. Because I think everybody knows the polls are wrong. I mean, you can look at some of these things. The Washington Post poll that came out this week on Wisconsin said that Biden was up by 17 points. Nobody with a brain believes that that's true. So this is just silly about Texas. Texas is going to be Republican. Trump is going to win. I think the bigger issue for Texas, and again, nobody's hearing about this because we're hearing about all this nonsense. The big issue is the state house, because the state house will be the ones that we redraw the lines for the congressional seats. And there are seats that are up in the state house where it's conceivable, it's possible. That's why the money is being poured into Texas, that if enough Democrats knock off enough Republican House members, the Democrats could control the House. They could therefore draw the districts, and it would probably change maybe 8 congressional seats in the U.S. Congress. Now, that's significant, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about Joe Biden, coming out of his bunker to win Texas, and that is just not going to happen. Unless some tsunami happens across the country that nobody's expecting. And this prediction is one that comes every few years, and it's silly. They need to stop.
We have Kelly Shackelford and Dr. Merrill Matthews. They haven't introduced the group around the table, but again, very familiar. But Dr. Matthews, any thoughts?
Kelly mentioned the Hispanic vote, and it has been growing, though a lot of Hispanics vote conservative. But what the concern, and I've been writing about this, is you've got a number of people in blue states that are fleeing those blue states because they've destroyed the states. And Texas is the number one destination of those. Florida tends to be one, Arizona's another. Colorado was one, and they ended up eventually turning Colorado blue because of so many Californians leaving the state to go to Colorado. So one of the things and we just don't have a good handle on this, because many of the people who are leaving those states come here and say, I want some freedom. I want lower taxes. I'm trying to escape that. But I think some of them are coming here also sort of bringing at least moderate blue policies with them and thinking, well, if I can't vote for Dianne Feinstein, at least I can vote for Beto O'Rourke or something, because he's a more moderate Democrat than some of the others out there. So it's interesting to see what's happening. Typically, when people have been here for a little while, they tend to say, I was liberal when I came here, but this conservative stuff and low tax is not half bad. So hopefully we change some of it, but it raises a question: what's happening in the cross-state migration?
Now, Minnesota, I do think that is a true story. I mean, Minnesota could flip Republican.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's obvious. I mean, one of the things, look,
I think you have to go back to Richard Nixon, 1972, for Minnesota.
There's some shifting going on, though. A number of states there is a realigning of states and parties. You know, the more, it used to be that blue collar vote was Democrat. The guys who worked in the factories and et cetera. And of course, you had the Reagan Democrat. I mean, the Reagan Democrats, he brought over the Republicans. But Trump is causing a realignment here. Very true. And now the question is, are there enough of those, sort of workers with grease under their fingernails that are going Republican now because they like America and they're more traditional, pro-America people, and they don't like the Marxism stuff they're seeing on the left? Are there enough of those to overcome all the white, elite, educated women, especially, that are moving from Republican to Democrat? Yeah. And so, but that alignment is causing states to start to change, and which ones are in play and which ones are not. But I think if you want to know, I don't know that it can trust the Democrat, their intelligence. I mean, them sending her to Texas.
Spending all day here, not just for one stop.
We haven't seen whether this operation of Biden really knows their numbers, but the Trump group, they really do know their numbers. If you look at last time, they knew which states to go into. Hillary Clinton didn't go into Wisconsin because she thought she had it in the bag. They were going there. So when you see the Trump team sending them to Minnesota, there's a reason for that. And I think so. If you watch where Trump is going, those are clearly places that are in play. What the result is, we'll have to wait and see.
And I mentioned that reshuffling in the Hill piece, and one of the things that are being reshuffled are the minority votes, African American and Hispanic votes. I expect Trump will get a larger percentage than he did. Yesterday, Rasmussen came out with their likely black voter poll, 31%.
31%.
31%. And when this came out last December, and they were saying something like 30% of the blacks supported Trump, we thought that sounds a little high. These have actually been fairly steady over the time, and I would be. That still sounds a little high to me, but it wouldn't surprise me if we don't get much higher numbers than we have in the past.
I love the Hill. I just have a question about this one that thinks Texas is going blue. But I do like this one in the Hill, which is Dr. Merrill Matthews' one about the various minorities. And since we just told Karen to put it up, we'll get it up there in a little bit, and then we'll talk about it again because it's just some really incredible numbers, which also get us into, maybe we'll talk about a little bit later, some of these rap music artists that are all hanging around there. And since I got two experts on rap music, maybe we can talk about some of those people. I'm only kidding. When we come back, though, I want to talk about Texas for a little bit longer because we have thousands of mail-in ballots that have been a mess in Tarrant County. We also have a race for a Speaker of the House in the Texas House. And as Kelly has pointed out before, that and who controls the Texas House is going to be very important. So we'll continue our conversation about Texas politics right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Why are suicides surging in America? There's no easy answer to that question, but there are some important clues. Some of the answers have been put forth in the latest CDC reports. We do have a number of deaths of despair that result from intended suicides as well as from opioid overdoses. And we also see suicides that have increased among our veterans that show the relationship between military combat and PTSD. But there are social, intellectual, and spiritual reasons for the increased number of suicides. In her article in Intellectual Takeout, Annie Holmquist wonders what is driving this mentality of despair. She reminds us that half the people who commit suicide do not have a known mental health condition. That is why looking at other issues is so important. She takes us back to the seminal book by University of Chicago professor Alan Bloom, The Closing of the American Mind. Even back in 1988, when the book was published, he saw a stark difference between the college students of that day and those just a few years before. They were superficial and continually indulged in cliches. They didn't reason on a deeper level and were disenchanted with the world. Believe me, if that was true of the college students in the 1980s, it is really true of the current generation of young people. They have grown up in a world of memes and cliches. They came of age in a world that long abandoned moral values. The recent discussion about D-Day and the greatest generation led many to suggest that the current generation might not be up to such challenges. Sadly, this generation is growing up without any appeal to moral and biblical values. They don't have anything to live for because they don't believe anything would be worth dying for. Suicide becomes an option when life is sterile, superficial, and soulless. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Racism, go to viewpoints.info/racism. That's viewpoints.info/racism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, let's focus on the state of Texas because there's certainly enough to talk about there. This one, thousands of mail-in ballots returned by voters in Texas's third largest county, that would be Tarrant County, right, have a printing defect that keeps them from being electronically counted, which now forces election workers to remake the duplicate ballots by hand, which, of course, is raising all sorts of questions about election security. We can go into the details about that, but I thought I'd go around the table because it just seems to me, Kelly Shackelford and Merrill Matthews here, that every 2 years, certainly every 4 years, we hear about these problems. And it's not like we didn't know there was an election November 3rd. It's not like we didn't know that we were going to print ballots. And it's not like we didn't know that we were going to use machines to count them. So somewhere along the line, you just have to say, can't we get this right when we talk about just the efficiency of the election system in America?
Evidently, no. And then you've got, of course, now this is, part of federalism and part of the Constitution, that although these are federal, even the federal elections like presidency and Congress and Senate, it's still a matter of, I think the specific words in the Constitution are, the state legislature is the one who comes up with how it's to be done. So it's different in every state, which is why you can have, mail-in voting in some states, have different rules for how you vote and all these different things, which creates a lot of chaos. But, that's kind of the whole concept of federalism, is letting people choose something different. Now, I think the whole idea of federalism is that you look and you go, hey, theirs is really running well. I think we'll do that. I don't know why that's not catching on.
It certainly
but,
isn't.
instead, they're trying to push more chaos. all these lawsuits, over 300 lawsuits. And the lawsuits are really, I mean, again, the Chief Justice is driving everybody crazy right now who's conservative, because what's happening is they have state statutes that are passed by the state legislature that say specifically, here's how our voting is done. And then somebody's coming to court and going, well, I'm worried about COVID, and so therefore we need to extend the election for 3 days. Mm-hmm. Well, it's not what the law says, but this judge is saying, well, I think this is an important constitutional right, and therefore I'm going to overrule the state legislature. And it goes up to the Supreme Court, and Justice Roberts many times is joining the liberals and saying, no problem.
Yeah.
And
different. One in Pennsylvania is okay, but the one in Wisconsin's not. And he's making a distinction, which I think is not a difference. So anyway, we won't get into all that at the moment, but it's a good example because we do expect that these, even though they're national elections, they're run by the states. Yep. And Dr. Merrill Matthews,
and actually run in many cases by the counties.
By the counties.
And so you were talking about Tarrant County, and just about a month ago or so in Dallas County, there was an issue of a number of people who had sent their mail-in ballots in, and the reader had somehow the envelope was such that the reader sent it back to them. It didn't read the Dallas County where it was supposed to. It read the address of the people who sent it, so they got these back in the mail. And this is I think a couple of thousand people or so who got their ballots back to them, and they're saying, "Well, I mailed this in, and here it is, come back to me now." And they had to go through and say, "Well, it was apparently a reader problem, and we're trying to get this fixed." But these kinds of things pop up around the country.
The lesson of the story is, if you haven't voted yet, go vote in person.
Yes.
That's that's the way you can know that the mail got there. It wasn't kicked out because your signature wasn't right or anything else. So, I understand some people might be in a health condition where they are in danger. Mm-hmm. In those situations, I totally understand. But if that's not that situation, which it's not for 99% of the people, go and vote.
Yes.
Make sure your vote really counts by being there to actually vote, and you can see that it gets in, because this is a pretty consequential election.
And apparently people are listening to you because we're getting record numbers in the early votes. Now, I think that's going to draw down from the people who actually vote on Election Day. Mm-hmm. Some of the hyperventilating of the media about we've got this many more, and so we still have Election Day. I think it's going to draw down the Election Day, but I do expect it to be a record number turnout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 84 million so far that have voted, and that number is increasing sometimes even as we do the show. Sometimes I'll say it's 84 at the beginning. It'll probably be about 86 by the time we finish because I check it on time to time. But nevertheless, just a good illustration of that. And I know some people around the table have voted because I haven't checked on it. So
I did.
Let's, if we can, get one more issue on the table. And this is one where I want to get Kelly's expertise. And also we're going to have Jonathan Signs on again. He was on last week, and he'll be on even Election Day, and that is we have the need for a new Speaker of the House in the Texas House, and that is something where you have a number of Republicans that have announced, Chris Patty, Trent Ashby, John Cryer, Jeannie Morrison. Those would be on the Republican side. You have a number of Democrats as well. And, of course, as Kelly just mentioned a minute ago, if Democrats somehow able to get 75 or more of the 150, then it would be that. But Kelly explained that a little bit. You know the Texas politics as well as anybody, because there was a time in which you ended up with a Speaker of the House in the past, not the most recent one, who, although was a Republican, was actually put in the position because of Democrats. And It was an interesting set of circumstances that we've never seen anywhere else, certainly not in the U.S. Congress.
Yeah, the way it works in the Texas legislature is the very first vote that they take on the floor, like for a piece of legislation, is for who their speaker will be. And the speaker has tremendous power in the Texas legislature. They appoint all the committees where everything comes from. They appoint all the committee chairs. So they really control the House. And the election and the way it works is there's like 150 seats. So if you have 76 in your party, then what would normally happen in Congress and anywhere else in the country is those 76 would go into a room and decide who they wanted from their party to be speaker. And whoever they decided, they would come out, make sure everybody voted for that person, and they would get them through. Only Republicans would do what happened in Texas, which is 7 and 9 Republicans who were the more liberal Republicans decided that they would get together and have all the Democrats jump behind one of them, and then they would be able to pick the speaker. And basically the Republican Party, who has the majority that the people elected, would not be really electing the speaker. And so they had Joe Strauss for a number of years. I don't know. The best word I can put for this party treason. I mean, that's basically treason, right? It's like, I'm going to allow because I want to be speaker, I'm going to get a few of my buddies and say, hey, I know we're Republicans, but let's just get all the Democrats to pick one of us, and then we'll be the speaker. I don't think that'll happen again because I think, especially Alan West is the chairman of the Republican Party.
Could be different.
I think there would be a revolt that you couldn't even imagine. So I think it's going to decide, do the Democrats win enough seats in this election to take over the Texas House? Not likely, but it's possible. If they do, they'll elect their speaker. If the Republicans, they'll pick one of their list of speakers.
Didn't they try to address this, though, a year or two ago, where they said we've got to make sure that we do this in our caucus or something? I mean, my recollection is they tried to address it.
Yeah, it was put in the grassroots were outraged by this whole process, so they put in the party platform that they should go into caucus, that the Republicans should go into caucus, say, let's have an election amongst ourselves. Whoever we agree with, that's who we'll all support on the floor. And but that's just it's just on the platform, so they can do what they want. It's just there will be some price to pay if they violate that approach and allow the Democrats, essentially the other party, to pick who the speaker is when they have a majority. Again, I don't think that'll happen again, but it happened once before. And so it's something that everybody in Texas will be watching for.
I divide everything into what happens before the election, what happens after the election, and Wednesday after the election, which would be next Wednesday, Matt Rinaldi's going to be on, and we'll talk about this speaker race and the significance of that. But we're going to need to take a break. But just before we do so, one more Texas point, which we maybe talk about after the break. James O'Keefe, we all know him, Project Veritas, apparently has uncovered some examples of election fraud. I know that shocks everybody around the table. And this one in San Antonio, where you had a political consultant that actually was helping an individual change her vote from Republican John Cornyn, who's, of course, the sitting senator, to the challenger, Democrat M.G. Hager. And so it's kind of an interesting example of what has actually happened and may happen more often. And so let me talk about that for just a minute, and the whole issue of election fraud, which Kelly sort of surfaced, because it used to be that you had to actually not only vote by mail, but have your actual ballot in by November 3rd. But now we're having some say, no, it could actually get in as late as the 6th or the 9th. Doesn't necessarily have to have a postmark, doesn't necessarily have to match signatures. What possibly could go wrong? We'll be right back.
2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
USA Radio News with Tim Berg.
We will have a tremendous stimulus package immediately after the election.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, Kelly Shackelford, Dr. Merrill Matthews, and I thought just before we get into what has been happening in the economy, which is pretty amazing and poorly covered by the press. I know that surprised everybody around the table as well. But nevertheless, this idea of election fraud is something that you pay attention to, because when it is possible that this election could go into overtime for a couple of reasons, since you don't have to count some of these ballots on Election Day in Pennsylvania. If it's close, we know what could happen there. Then I will add to that, and we'll talk about this more in the national hour, it is almost clear that at least one or two senatorial elections will go into overtime, because in the case of Georgia, you have three candidates. Nobody's going to get 50% of the vote. So at least the special election will have to be decided by a runoff, which is January 5th. you assume that David Perdue might get the 50%, but if he doesn't either, then both of those elections in Georgia would be decided in January. And if indeed there are some losses for Republicans, say in Arizona, Maine, North Carolina, whatever it might be, there's a pickup, I think, of Republicans in Alabama, you would not know who is running the United States Senate till then. And this is why when you start fiddling with the election laws and you have all sorts of other different kind of statewide requirements, we really could be trying to figure out who the president is and even who is controlling the Senate this time next week. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, it's what's interesting to me about this is this news about the 33% surge in GDP, which has never happened in the country before. Normally, if we went back to what elections were always like, it would be over.
That'd be it.
Right? It'd be over. If it wasn't the, I hate Trump, I don't like him, the let's all start voting 2 months before the election, all this, and we were going into this. I mean, just think about this. You had this economy, and the economy was always the number one thing people were voting on, right? And you had this economy booming. And then you have this Chinese virus that gets unleashed on the world, and the economy goes down. And Trump's he's fighting to keep businesses open. I mean, this is part of the criticism against him, like he hasn't solved COVID, which is just ridiculous, but is that he actually wanted to open things up as soon as possible. But as this happened in the economy, everybody just took a body blow with, all the businesses shut down and everything else. He said, we're going to bring this up in a V curve. It's going to go down and back up. And everybody said, not going to happen. They said, it's not even going to start until 2021. And here, I mean, I don't know if people could see this chart. Basically, you see the economy going up, and you see a line moving up, which is how it was before COVID. Then you see this big drop. You would think it would take years to get back up to where it was. It's 2/3 of the way back up already. Mm-hmm. And so, again, normally people would look at this and they would say, oh, my gosh, why would I change to Biden? I have no idea what he would do to the economy. Now, I have an idea, but, I mean, nobody would really have any idea. Why would you change when the economy's almost come back now in the midst of a pandemic? Normally this would be over, but it just shows this is not normal. And so we'll have to wait and see what happens in the election. But this is really big.
And you're seeing within several sectors good news. So the Wall Street Journal reports yesterday, car sector roars back from nadir. They had the car manufacturer saw a huge drop, but now they're coming back to record profits. So that's one of the good news. And here's another one. Consumers spend more, borrow less. This is actually really good news. One of the things that happened is consumer spending ticked up over the quarter.
Yes.
And borrowing is less. So remember in the financial crisis back in 2007, 2009, when the financial crisis hit, you had a lot of people who had a lot of debt they could not afford. And that really hit a lot of people hard. What's happening now is you've got consumers spending more, but they're borrowing less, so they're actually having some savings and doing well. That said, we are moving back into a lockdown in some places. El Paso wants to lock down.
Here we go again.
Europe is locking down, and they're getting some pushback. Italians are demonstrating against lockdowns that they're trying to do in some curfews. Yesterday or the day before yesterday, Macron in France has said we're going to lock down the French economy for another month. Germany is going to a modified lockdown on some of these things.
Big mistake.
We may see some counties and some cities try to do it here, but I think most of the Americans are just so over lockdowns they don't want to go there again.
Now, I think this might be one of the biggest issues of the election. I know we'll talk about this more in the national hour, but I think that to some extent, people are, you always there's all these details when you look at the two candidates, and we could talk about a lot of different, differences between them. But if you looked at a big theme and thought, if there's one message coming out from the candidate, the pandemic is kind of risen because that's the whole. I think Trump's ahead of Biden on everything except the coronavirus. Not that anybody thinks that there's anything particular that he could have done differently. They just don't like it. They're going to blame him. He was in charge. So on that, what is the image right now? I think the image is one of we're going to get this thing. We're going to get therapeutics. And the other is we're going to lock everything down.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really Newt Gingrich was on TV the other day, and he said something I thought was really good as far as a quick image for something very complex and detailed. He said the image of Biden is a rabbit hiding. The image of Trump is like a bear.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is. It's different. And so if you don't want a lockdown, then you don't want Biden. If you're scared of the coronavirus and you want lockdowns and you want all that, then you want Biden. And so, people are very different on this thing. But I think overall, on the lockdown versus the non-lockdown, I think people are done with that. And I think that's why we're seeing some shifting towards Trump at the end, because that debate was the dark winter of Joe Biden versus the Trump more optimistic. We're around the corner. We're just around the corner from this thing with the vaccine, the therapeutics, the death rates going down, et cetera.
And what's interesting about this is, of course, Biden's been saying if we had done like Europe had done, we would have had this thing resolved. Well, the virus comes back, and it's coming back with a vengeance in Europe. But the other thing is when a vaccine is going to be ready and when a therapeutic is going to be ready, a therapy for it. You had Fauci and others saying, well, we think we may have, a good number of them by end of March, early April, maybe, but it may be mid-January, mid-summer before we actually have 700 million doses. We don't need 700 million doses. You're going to go to first responders first. I suspect that will start declining the numbers some. People who are more vulnerable, seniors and others, will start getting those early doses. And I suspect if we get 100 doses or so by the end of the year, early January, as they're expecting, that's a 2-dose regimen for most people. That's 50 million people. That's you start really getting a lot of these by the time you get into February. So I think it's possible by the time we get in February and early March, if we have the doses we're thinking we're going to have, 250, 300 million doses, giving double doses to people, you've sort of got the thing under control at that time.
Yeah, I really think that, if this is the issue, and I think it is right now, because it's hard, again, because there's a lot. If you're pro-life, then that's your number one issue, probably. We're on the verge. Everybody's just looking at this new justice going on in the Supreme Court and thinking maybe everything we've been praying about and working for 40 years is about to change, because we have a court that's actually going to, go take us back to the Constitution, and things like Roe v. Wade are going to be over, right? So they're looking at those things. But I think it's just the regular American. If you had to pick one thing, one big image between the two, to me, it's the coronavirus. And I don't think anybody thinks that Biden has some specific thing that he's going to do that Trump and the scientists and things haven't done. So I think the image right now is sort of more of a lockdown versus a keep it going approach. And I do think that is to Trump's advantage now. The polls are fascinating when you look at this. They say, do you fear the coronavirus?
Yes.
It's a fascinating poll because it's like, almost 75%, 76% of Democrats, yes. And Republicans was like 26. And so that explains a lot, One side's looking at the other and going, what is wrong with you? And that's the baseline, is this fear versus this, hold on a second, I'm not going to live my life in a basement. Mm-hmm. And so that, I think, is going to decide the election. That's going to decide what people do over the next few days.
Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We will do so right after this.
Coverage of pre-existing health conditions has been a hot button in presidential debates and Senate hearings for a Supreme Court nominee. In one debate, Joe Biden argued that 100 million people who have pre-existing conditions will lose their health insurance if the Trump administration wins an Obamacare case set to be argued at the U.S. Supreme Court November 10th. This is false. Republican attorneys general are asking the Supreme Court to strike down the Affordable Care Act. They contend that after federal lawmakers in 2017 zeroed out the individual mandate's penalty for lacking health insurance, the entire Affordable Care Act was rendered null and void. But there's a bipartisan consensus that any healthcare system we implement must protect people with pre-existing conditions. The 180 million Americans who have insurance through their employers automatically get their pre-existing conditions covered because of a law passed in the 1990s. This encompasses 90% of Americans with private health coverage. Part of the argument put forward by those supporting the passage of Obamacare was that people seeking individual insurance policies were sometimes denied coverage for their pre-existing conditions. The Affordable Care Act was supposed to fix this by requiring that all policies cover pre-existing conditions. But if you can't afford insurance coverage, that guarantee doesn't help you. According to Seema Verma, administrator for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Obamacare created a new class of uninsured, none of whom had the slightest protection against their pre-existing conditions. She explains in an article for National Review, after premiums doubled and even tripled in some states, once Obamacare regulations took effect, individual market coverage became unaffordable and unusable for millions of middle-class and self-employed Americans earning too much to qualify for subsidies. President Trump recently unveiled his America First healthcare plan, parts of which are already operational via executive order. It makes healthcare less expensive and emphasizes coverage of pre-existing conditions. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes before we, of course, have our national hour. Let me just give you a preview because we will be talking with Kelly Shackelford about some good news about their client, Gail Blair, who was, as you know, an elderly blind woman who was prevented from sharing the gospel in a park, and we have good news about that. Going to talk about Twitter's censorship, and that's become a big issue and even testimony. We'll also get into a very good piece that Dr. Merrill Matthews has written on whether or not blacks and Hispanics could hand Trump a victory. We'll get into this whole idea of who was anonymous. Turns out he wasn't senior anything, but we'll get into that as well. But just before we finish off on this, I'm going to hold this up for those of you that happen to be watching online. Sometimes you watch on Facebook or online. You will see the graph that Kelly is talking about, and it is really dramatic because, as you see, it rises, then it drops, but now we have a V, and we have that V shape. Everybody was saying it's going to be like a U shape or it was going to be like a Nike swoosh. No, it's like a V. Looks a lot like a V. And so Kelly explained to this because I almost always, when I post something about the economy, usually Associated Press or maybe Washington Post or New York Times, and you were the one that passed this on to me, and that's the one I posted because it actually comes from the White House. And the reason for it is it's the only place I think, honestly, express this in a fair way. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm looking at here. I started looking because I was going to put it on my own Facebook. That this, it was good news for everybody in the country that the GDP had gone up by 33%, which has never happened in the history of our country. Right? This is good news. And everywhere I went, the headline was, record surge in GDP, but. And I'm like, what? What do you mean, but? Like, I'm looking just right now. American just posted a record GDP growth rate. Now brace for the shutdown. Okay, that's CNN. Okay, here's another one. Trump's new GDP tweets disregard employment math and COVID-19. Okay, so here's the next one. U.S. economic growth shatters record at 33%, but fails to snap the coronavirus recession. You're like, if you look at your chart, it takes the recession. I mean, the economy was going up, and then it just drops.
Yeah.
It almost completely catches up again, and it says, but we failed to totally catch up.
Oh.
And so you're like reading these headlines going, good grief, this really must be difficult for them to come up with something to say that's not positive, because it's positive. So it's a shame, but this is the kind of stuff. Now, I will say this. I just looked today, and there's a Fox News headline that says, CNN, NBC primetime shows skip historic 33% GDP growth and economic recovery. So at least somebody's noticed that this is what's happening.
They don't even talk about it.
It's so sad.
Yeah.
But that's why we just look at the data from the White House on the specific numbers of what happened.
Well, let me take us back 3 months.
Please.
To the end of the second quarter, where when we talk about the 33.1% increase, that's an annualized deal, and we had to talk about that 3 months ago.
Remember that?
Because
yes.
it's 7.4% for the quarter, 33.1 annualized. Last quarter, as they came out with a number where we dropped like 31 or 32%, nobody was talking about anything. That was the headline.
Yes.
And nobody said, we had to go look and find out what are we talking about just on the quarter here, because it's not really 33, okay, because that's annualized. But that was the leading headline, and there was no but then.
No
we were
but.
the ones doing the but. We were the ones saying, yes, it's 30-something% down, but it's not that big for the quarter. That's annualized, and now you don't get really anybody doing either number.
Yeah, look, everybody should. This is really incredible what we've gone through, right? First, we had a president that, and I think a major reason for the reason the economy was rocketing off is because of all the reduced regulations.
I think so, too.
I don't know what the final figure was. I know at one point it was like 22 regulations gone for every new one. And anybody who's in business knows that a lot of these ridiculous regulations are what really hampers, especially small businesses. And those were being taken off, and industry was booming. The tax, you got the tax bill, you got the lowering of the corporate tax rate. This money was coming back into the United States that had been placed overseas in other accounts, and it was just going, right? And then the Chinese virus, which Trump, again, whatever you want to say, Trump didn't control the Chinese virus, okay? Everybody all over the world is dealing with this. Boom, the economy gets hit because of all these shutdowns. And, I don't think there's, Buddy can tell me if there's any economist, even Stephen Moore, who predicted that we could get this back within, a year, much less within the same year, that we're almost, we're really moving on a way to get back much quicker than I think anybody thought. It's really incredible news. Again, put the politics aside. If there wasn't an election, everybody should be really encouraged. If my business is suffering, things are coming back. Everything is, and it's not like a little bit at a time. It's roaring back. And so if, it also is important for people to have this information, because if somebody tries to shut down, like we have certain governors, and I think of California right now, and everybody telling families not to be together for Thanksgiving and all this just insanity, they need data to be able to fight against that. They need to be able to say, you're not going to destroy our economy right when we're finally getting it to come back. We can do things safely and not shut down our economy. So it's really important that it get out there, but it's just sad that a number of these people, because of their politics, won't present the information that is really good information for the country.
And the irony here is, of course, that Joe Biden has been criticizing Trump for 50 million people unemployed, but it's the lockdowns that they support that created
Yes.
the unemployment. I mean, and just to be clear, Trump didn't lock down anything. It's the
No.
governors who locked down things. They provided guidance on things, but it was Republican and Democratic governors. And you had various experiments with some, a few states did not lock down at all. Several locked down even harder, and some, I think, are still in parts of the lockdown. So that it's the lockdown that kills the economy. It's not Trump that kills the
Right.
economy. If you just take the regulations off, and I agree with you on the regulations aspect. Incidentally, with regard to Joe Biden and fracking, Joe Biden doesn't have to come in and say we're banning fracking. He just has to put in the regulations.
That's right.
That
We saw that with
that
coal,
Barack Obama
didn't
was
we?
trying to do as well,
Right.
and other things. And then you ultimately kill it by the regulations. So you can say I didn't go out and stop it. I just allowed these regulations to go in that ultimately kill it.
So again, just some great material that we've covered here. And if you find yourself saying, I've got to read it for myself, again, it is the second article. First one we're going to talk about after the break, and that is a very good religious liberty case for this blind woman. But this is fairly rare. Usually I don't post something from the White House, but we did it out of frustration because we couldn't find anybody that was going to tell the truth. And again, a real GDP growth of 7.4%, which would be 33% on an annual rate. Okay, so that's coming from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. And when it was minus 33%, we seemed to hear about it. And when it was plus 33%, we didn't hear about it. Now, both of those were annualized rates. And so we're going to take a break. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to read it for myself, do so, because that second page actually shows you the graph and the chart. And you can be like Kelly Shackelford. Maybe you can post it on your webpage or your Facebook page or your Twitter account or whatever it might be. When we come back from the break, though, we're going to talk about this incredible story, which has so resonated with people. Your client, Gail Blair, and especially wanted to wait till we at our national audience, because we do broadcast in Rhode Island, and I have heard from people in Rhode Island. They can't believe what happened in Providence, but the good news is that was resolved. Of course, Twitter just does not want to cover certain stories. And a guy looked kind of like almost a homeless guy. I guess his name is Jack Dorsey, showed up in the Senate by video. So we'll talk about all that right after these important messages.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View radio talk show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, and in studio with us today, Kelly Shackelford, President and CEO of First Liberty Institute, as well as Dr. Merrill Matthews, who is the resident scholar at the Institute for Policy Innovation. We're going to be talking about a very good religious liberty case that has been settled by Kelly Shackelford, the blind woman who was actually sharing the gospel at a park there in Rhode Island. So I wanted to cover that. That's our first article. Second one, which we'll get to a little bit later, the economic recovery in America. The Bureau of Economic Analysis estimates that the real GDP grew by 7.4%, or on an annual rate, 33%. And so that is what you call a V-shaped recovery. So we'll get to that maybe a little bit later. Of course, Twitter has been in the news in terms of its censorship, and there was testimony this week in the Senate and a variety of other issues. And before we're all done, I thought we might also spend some time talking with Kelly Shackelford, because he was there at the swearing in of Amy Coney Barrett, which also brings us to our action item today, because if you haven't been paying attention, everybody from the Girl Scouts to the Kappa Delta sorority posted some very positive things about her, and because of the media mob, the woke mob, had to take them down. So we're suggesting in our action alert, which we'll talk about in just a minute, an opportunity for you to express your opinion to those individuals. But Kelly, first of all, one of the stories that has really concerned many of our listeners is this woman, Gail Blair, elderly blind resident in Rhode Island, who is doing nothing more than simply going to a park and sometimes talking about her faith in a park, and told that she could not do so and was banned from going there. Tell us the rest of the story.
It's an unbelievable story. In fact, I would encourage people, if they get a chance, go to the website at firstliberty.org, and Point of View might even be able to pull this up before we're done today. I just watched the video. It's a 3-minute video, and I just think it's so powerful because you hear directly from Gail. And it's one of those easy things, I think, to share with people. And it really is, I think, a powerful witness and an encouragement for believers to really listen to what the Lord is telling you to do. Her story is Gail was slowly going blind from a disease. She really had a heart for serving other people. She was in nursing and healthcare, but she went blind, and she found herself thinking during that process, what is the most important thing to me? And she realized the most important thing is for people to know about Jesus. And so she says in the video, it's the part that really kind of, I don't know, it's hard video to watch without having tears well up in your eyes. But the part that to me is the most powerful is at the end of the video, she says, God has an assignment for me. I'm in the apartment across from the park. And it's so simple, but she sees what God wants her to do. She said it's not an accident that when I'm blind now, that my apartment is right across from the park. And so she goes out there every day with her walking stick so she can find her way across the street, and she carries some copies of the Gospel of John. And obviously she can't see people, but if people come and sit next to her or whatever, she'll talk to them and she'll say, would you like a copy of the Gospel of John? Well, believe it or not, she has been banned from the park and from the library for 2 years. Police officers were sent to her home. I mean, it's unbelievable. The good news is we filed a legal action. There's now been a settlement, and she is now not going to be stopped anymore from going into the park and talking about Jesus. But it's just incredible that we had to fight for this. I'll tell you, one of the things, we have our prayer time as a group every week at First Liberty. And one of the things we kept praying for, because she kept calling and saying, when can I get back into the park? She, every week was like tearing at her because she couldn't do what God wanted her to do. And so we told her, we said, Gail, we do want you to know that your witness, your example is getting out to millions of people. So maybe, even though you're being delayed from I know what God's called you to do, maybe God is using this to create more Gail Blairs across the country. But that still didn't do it. She wanted to be back in that park. And the good news is she's now back in the park. And, this is over and hopefully will never happen again. But I would encourage people, get that video, send it around, put it on your Facebook or wherever. I just think it's a witness that is real. It reminds me a lot. You were saying this earlier, Kerby, about it reminds me of the Coach Kennedy case. Of course, Coach Kennedy, who was fired for going to a knee and saying a prayer after the football game. It was kind of like, well, are you willing to take a knee when it could cost you something? This, to me, is one of those cases that people look at Gail Blair and they're like, she's blind, she's in a little apartment across in the park, but wow, does she have a real job to do? And I think we all do. We all have an assignment from the Lord, and her example is I think really precious, and it shows the importance of us having the freedom to do what God's calling us to do.
Again, we have the press release there, and again, you commend the Rhode Island Memorial and Library Association for resolving that. And I know we have listeners in Rhode Island, so you might want to follow up on that or express your opinion to them. And nothing else. Dr. Merrill Matthews, it is just another one of those religious liberty cases that you have a good feeling about when it's all resolved.
We do, and thankful for First Liberty, because they're the ones out there driving these things to a successful conclusion on so many cases.
So again, some very important issues that you might want to know about. But Kelly, I guess after the break, I thought I might have you speak briefly about the fact that we last week were talking about the vote to confirm Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. And then you were right there in the South Lawn of the White House, once again, getting a chance to watch that. And so it was a really encouraging time. I did point out at the time on Tuesday that we went back to our friends at Media Research Center. ABC gave it no seconds. CBS and NBC gave it 50 seconds. And then even CNN kind of came in and out. Really, if you wanted to watch the entire procedure, you either had to watch Fox News or C-SPAN. Those are the only two that actually covered what you got a chance to see. So maybe when we come back from the break, I want to talk about that. But if you're not familiar with that, there was a real sense of excitement on the part of those on the Girl Scouts, because now we have another female Supreme Court justice. And those of you watching online can see this blow up that I did of the Twitter, in which it shows, of course, Sandra Day O'Connor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Elena Kagan, and Sonia Sotomayor, and Amy Coney Barrett. Well, that one didn't last very long, because the woke mob came after the Girl Scouts and they capitulated. And so we're thinking maybe since there were so many people criticizing them, maybe you might want to express your opinion about that. And then Amy Coney Barrett was a member, of course, of the sorority Kappa Delta. They did the same thing, and the woke mob came after them. So we'll talk about some of this right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Why are suicides surging in America? There's no easy answer to that question, but there are some important clues. Some of the answers have been put forth in the latest CDC reports. We do have a number of deaths of despair that result from intended suicides as well as from opioid overdoses. And we also see suicides that have increased among our veterans that show the relationship between military combat and PTSD. But there are social, intellectual, and spiritual reasons for the increased number of suicides. In her article in Intellectual Takeout, Annie Holmquist wonders what is driving this mentality of despair. She reminds us that half the people who commit suicide do not have a known mental health condition. That is why looking at other issues is so important. She takes us back to the seminal book by University of Chicago professor Alan Bloom, The Closing of the American Mind. Even back in 1988, when the book was published, he saw a stark difference between the college students of that day and those just a few years before. They were superficial and continually indulged in cliches. They didn't reason on a deeper level and were disenchanted with the world. Believe me, if that was true of the college students in the 1980s, it is really true of the current generation of young people. They have grown up in a world of memes and cliches. They came of age in a world that long abandoned moral values. The recent discussion about D-Day and the greatest generation led many to suggest that the current generation might not be up to such challenges. Sadly, this generation is growing up without any appeal to moral and biblical values. They don't have anything to live for because they don't believe anything would be worth dying for. Suicide becomes an option when life is sterile, superficial, and soulless. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Racism, go to viewpoints.info/racism. That's viewpoints.info/racism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talking about religious liberty a minute ago, and now talking about Amy Coney Barrett, who is now Justice Amy Coney Barrett. And we might explain a couple of things. First of all, you were at the swearing in that had Clarence Thomas, again, the Associate Justice, and then the next day, the swearing in with the Chief Justice. So we'll talk about the significance of all of that. And then I want to get to one of the action items, if you would want to do so. The Girl Scouts, to their credit, over the years have actually highlighted any woman that has actually been significant, whether it was an astronaut like a Sally Ride, or whether it was even the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I found a tweet that actually focused on 4 of the women on the Supreme Court. But when you added Amy Coney Barrett, that was a bridge too far for our liberal, and I put friends in quotes here. And so as a result, just an incredible apology and backtracking of the Girl Scouts. And I thought maybe you'd like to express your opinion to them about that. And of course, Amy Coney Barrett also has been a sorority sister with those in Kappa Delta, and Kappa Delta posted again a very positive tweet, which then they backed down on as well. But Kelly,
just incredible.
Yeah, okay,
I mean, this is where we have to take charge in this country, okay, or we're going to lose our country. This is where the cancel culture works, right, to try to censor things. Look, everybody knows that whether it's a sorority or the Girl Scouts or whatever else, they're not promoting them because they're Republican or Democrat. They're promoting them because they're one of their, sisters in the case of KD, or they're a girl in the case of the Girl Scouts. When somebody comes back and says, "Oh, I'm so offended," everybody has to do this, right? The response ought to be, sorry, get lost. Okay?
Well, we're going to give people a chance to do that in just a minute.
And if not, people ought to say, what kind of group are you? You don't have any courage. You're now discriminating. It's based upon who screams at you. Irrational, really hateful people are being allowed to control everything, and we can't let that happen. I mean, it requires us. This is bully tactics, right? And the thing you have to do with a bully is stand up right in their face and say, that's not going to work here. And these are two examples. If you're a member of a group and they start to do this kind of stuff, you have to say, no, it's unacceptable. Or else we're going to get what we got. You know, the exact opposite of this is the discussion that went on publicly between John Piper, who said, I think he's not voting for either presidential candidate.
Right.
A lot of evangelical Christians thought that was a really bad, idea, and that what he laid out was wrong. Wayne Grudem, one of the best theologians in the country, responded to that point by point, laying out the arguments why he's voting for Trump. The discussion is so what America's about, because even at the very end, Piper reaches out to Wayne and says, one of your points is really good, but you could probably even make it stronger against me here. And this is what was going back and forth. That is what America is about. That is how things work with the marketplace of ideas. If you allow these other people to control our country, we're not going to have a country. And so it's going to require people like us, if you're in the Girl Scouts or if you're a KD, it's going to require those people to stand up and say, this is not acceptable. And they ought to change it back right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they had in that picture on Twitter in the Girl Scouts, Sonia Sotomayor in the picture, Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the picture, Elena Kagan in the picture. These are liberals, okay? The idea that you can't have the picture because it includes Amy Coney Barrett, who, by the way, if you go pre-hearing to post-hearing, there was an increase of 20% Democrat support as a result of the hearing. This was not a hard thing to stick with. But people have to speak up, or this is what's going to happen across our country over and over again.
And, on the flip side of this, you had conservative after conservative coming out saying good things about Ruth Bader Ginsburg after she died. They'd say, I disagreed with some of her judicial philosophy and so forth. She was a definitely intelligent woman, a trendsetter for women and other things. And you just don't get that on the conservative side. And speaking of the cancel culture, have you noticed over the past few days, Washington, D.C., downtown Washington, D.C., stores have been boarding up because they're afraid of what's happening. Governors are getting the National Guard or the military ready just in case. I don't think it's because they're afraid of a Trump of a Biden victory. If Biden victory happens, I think it's quiet. If a Trump victory happens, I think they're afraid that you'll see riots all over the country.
Let me just mention that the Girl Scouts said earlier today we shared a post highlighting the 5 women who have been appointed to the Supreme Court. It was quickly viewed as a political and partisan statement, which was not our intent, and we've removed the post. And, it says we're here to lift up girls and women, but then they counteract it with that. And so I just... let me just mention real quickly that we are posting on our website, pointofview.net. If you go to the action alerts, not quite up there yet, but it will be shortly, a chance for you to click on that. And for those of you that receive an email, if you want to express your opinion to the Girl Scouts or Kappa Delta, we're going to make it easy for you to do so. Be gracious, but if nothing else, I think, Kelly, we oftentimes say politics is downstream of the culture. No matter who's elected on Tuesday, we need to come back and recognize we need to focus on the culture. And this is a good example. If you keep actually allowing the woke mob to actually cancel everything and destroy the culture, then politics is going to follow suit. And it seems to me that we need to stand up. And you said just 2 weeks ago, if I remember right, that your daughter was watching Amy Coney Barrett and how she handled herself in the testimony there and said, what a great role model. And I think she could be a great role model for a lot of women in the country.
Absolutely. I think, again, my daughter's, 24, intelligent, like growing up, she would read like 2 books a week. She just couldn't wait to finish her homework so she could read a book, right? Incredible writer, strong believer, mom. What role model? What national woman? It's like with women, the only role models allowed for, strong, intelligent women were we had to be liberal. I mean, where are the conservative role models that are out there? Well, Amy Coney Barrett is that, okay? She's got 7 kids. She's in a minivan. She's got 2 adopted kids, a special needs child. She is, incredible in many ways, and including how she handled herself in the midst of a bunch of ravenous wolves trying to get after her, right? And that's a great thing for our country. And what's interesting is, again, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that's what she was supposedly fighting for, is the right of women to be able to do. And it wasn't that she was allegedly fighting for the right of liberal women. She was fighting for the rights of women. And so this also, it's interesting that God used this as probably one of the most pivotal, new justices ever. It's been, it was the 1930s was the last time we had a reliably conservative Supreme Court, meaning a conservative judicial philosophy of really acting like judges and not legislators, and saying, I'm going to, confine myself to the text and to the original meaning of the text. We haven't had that. This is a huge shift, historical shift that just happened. It's incredible what did happen for our country in a lot of different ways. I think very, very historical.
And Amy Coney Barrett was such a stellar candidate that Democrats, especially being a woman, had to pull back their kind of thing that they had used on Kavanaugh, just because you couldn't. It just did not look good to try to be attacking her the same way.
So again, go ahead.
I was going to say, we might not have as much time, but we maybe would come back from the break. But I can describe being at the swearing in.
I wanted to have you talk about that.
It was historic. It was one in a lifetime, but it was just very interesting. There's some things I could say. It was different than you would normally see, but I thought very appropriate. But we'll have more time. I'll talk about that just for 30 seconds or a minute after we get back.
Well, we'll do that. And again, I know some of you would like to hear what it was like for him to actually be there. And I mentioned earlier that we will talk about the economic recovery. Of course, the whole issue of Twitter. And then, interestingly enough, Intercept is something that was started, and the founder finally left because there's just absolutely no willingness to cover stories like Tony Bobulinski and the Bidens and others. And so we'll get into that issue of groupthink, the whole question of who was anonymous, and even the impact of third-party candidates. So we have a lot of articles we published and posted, but also we wanted to give you a chance to express your opinion about Amy Coney Barrett and the action items that we are putting on the website as we speak. All of that we will talk about right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Kelly Shackelford and Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio with us today, and we'll take a couple of phone calls. Then we're going to move on real quickly because, of course, the Senate has been asking some very good questions of big tech, and in particular, the whole question of how Twitter has been handling some of the news stories, and a number of people talking about that. But Kelly Shackelford, you were there at the swearing in, and this one was where you have the Associate Justice Clarence Thomas giving that particular oath of office, and then the next day with the Chief Justice. But you were there. What was it like?
You know, it was different. It was very difficult for me to actually attend. We had a major event earlier that day in Dallas at noon. And so I had to finish that event, jump on a plane, get to D.C., Get to that. It's 9 o'clock D.C. time. And then I had another major event the next day at noon back in town. So I went through the ringer and got 4 hours of sleep. Why? Because I was like, there's no way I'm going to miss this. This is a really moment in history. And so normally if people remember, the swearing in of a justice is like in a hallway somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. With 4 or 5 people. So I get this invitation from the president and I'm walking onto the White House lawn, got through security. And as I'm walking, I'm like, I think I hear a band playing. And I'm walking up and there is the military band playing. And I walk up to the White House, and if you didn't see it, if those who didn't see it, there are American flags hanging. It's spectacular. And I just thought, the president is such a showman, right?
Yes. Yes.
That he made this a big deal. It is a big deal, but normally it's just kind of lost. And I thought this is a good thing. This is one of our branches of government, and this is an important day, and it was a really special time. Everybody who I was there with, knew, you could tell that they felt this is a really special, unique thing that has happened, and they wanted to be there. And I thought it was powerful. You have this woman who the first time anybody's been openly, outwardly, not only religious, but pro-life. The Republicans had always avoided that in the past, not here. And you've got her being sworn in by, an African-American justice on the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas, who's the most conservative on the Supreme Court. So you had the president, Amy Coney Barrett, Justice Thomas. It was very, for those who are on the more conservative side, certainly they look at that and go, wow, this is a big change, a big movement. And I thought it was significant that it was Thomas there to do her swearing in. And I thought there was something fitting. It was almost like Scalia couldn't be there, so Justice Thomas was there. She had clerked for Scalia. But it was a really special day. But I thought, and by the way, if people want to see or hear some of this, I captured some video.
Yes, it's on your Facebook.
It is. But what we did is I gave it to our team, and we have a new website with all of our videos now called First Liberty Live. You just spell it out, firstlibertylive.com. And you can watch some of the video. You can hear the music and see, kind of get a little feel for what it was like. But that is so different. That is not normally what happens. But in the Trump world, that's what happens. Things get made. You're standing in between the White House and the Washington Monument with flags and music, and which I think is great. It's America. It reminds you of 4th of July or so.
And how many people were there at the reception?
I don't know exactly, because they were the chairs were so spread out. I'm going to guess it was 100. But it wasn't huge, but it was spread out. It looked like more because of all the social distancing.
Let's take a few phone calls here. Damius on Texas, KAVX. Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for joining me, Mr. Anderson, Dr. Matthews, and Mr. Shackelford. First time caller, long time listener.
What would you like to add?
I think the woke culture has lost its everlasting mind. I'm serious. I'm just a young preacher, and I preach all the time. And I think that California and New York need to get their house in order.
Amen.
Yeah. Well, if nothing else, again, there are opportunities for you, which we will make available if you would like to express your opinion to the Girl Scouts or to Kappa Delta. And I might just mention Kappa Delta's was also kind of weak. To our sisters and others who were hurt by yesterday's social media post or subsequent removal, we're deeply sorry. Our approach was disappointing and hurtful to many. We do not intend to enter into a political debate, which has nothing to do with anything.
No.
Take a stand on the Supreme Court nomination, cause division among our sisters, or alienate any of our members. We now understand that was the impact. And if this was an astronaut that was a Kappa Delta, they would put it up there, even if the astronaut was a Republican. But because it's Amy Coney Barrett, they're coming after her. But I still am convinced that after about a year or two, when women are asked who are some of the individuals that you have the greatest respect for, she might end up on that list.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the response to this should have been very simple. It should have been, we're not supporting anybody because they're a Republican or a Democrat. We have always supported women, whether they're Republican or Democrat, who are elevated to these positions. This is if you're the KD, this is one of our sisters who just got on the Supreme Court. Okay, if you have a problem with that, then the problem is you. I mean, that's what people need to start saying this.
And of course, the Girl Scouts had Sandra Day O'Connor on there, who was a Republican.
Yeah. So anyway, let me take one more. David in South Carolina, I think you have a comment, so we wanted to give you that opportunity as well.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good evening, guys. I'm listening, and I've been listening for now 15 years. And I took issue back in 2008 when John McCain picked Sarah Palin. And I'm going to take issue with this nomination also because of what the Bible says. Now, I just heard Mr. Shackelford was saying that if the issue is with me, because I'm listening, but the issue is with the Word of God. And when you read the book of Isaiah, it is telling me, matter of fact, our pastor's wife was just teaching her women's group, and it aired on the radio on the same passage, and John MacArthur taught on this passage. So the passage I'm referring to is Isaiah chapter 3 and chapter 4. And it warns us, I know it's Old Testament, but still it's applied to us today. And I'm going to take issue with it because it says when you see women coming to the head of the nation in the government, which is the Supreme Court is one of the branches of our government, that is a precursor or a sign of impending judgment.
You know, again, you mentioned John MacArthur. I don't think John MacArthur has a problem with Amy Coney Barrett. I don't know that Wayne Grudem does. I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking of very respected individuals that certainly would understand the Old Testament and apply that.
Now, first, obviously, what he's calling about is different from what we're talking about with the Girl Scouts. The Girl Scouts are not pulling their mention of her because they don't think a woman should be on the Supreme Court. They're pulling their mention of her because of partisan politics, and bullying. On the issue of her being on the Supreme Court, you've also got the Old Testament story of Deborah, who people would say is somewhat of a judgment. Where are the men leaders, right?
She's a judge.
So let's step back and say we don't know what God's doing here, but what if God is responding to 61 million babies being murdered in this country and us allowing it to happen, and he picks an outwardly pro-life woman with 7 children and 2 adopted children, including a disabled child, to be the one to be the deciding vote to say this is over? I mean, is that possible? I think it's possible. I mean, in fact, I think it's probable. And I think that, all this timing is fairly incredible of what happened right before the election, that Ruth Bader Ginsburg died on Rosh Hashanah, that Amy Coney Barrett was announced from the Rose Garden as the nominee on Yom Kippur. Interesting coincidences,
So if Deborah can be a judge, Amy can be a justice.
That's right. Good lines. Let's take a break, though, because we have a lot more to cover. And our third article here is about Twitter's kinds of censorship issue. And this has been something that not only has been a source of some concern ever since we had these initial stories that came out through the New York Post, but since then, just almost a complete media blackout. If you were to say the name Tony Bobulinski, if you only listen to the mainstream media, you'd say, I don't even know what that name means. And that, I think, says a lot right there. And the fact that Twitter would not allow any of those articles to be actually forwarded and close down various accounts is the reason Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, showed up in front of the Senate this week. So we'll talk about that right after this.
coverage of pre-existing health conditions has been a hot button in presidential debates and Senate hearings for a Supreme Court nominee. In one debate, Joe Biden argued that 100 million people who have pre-existing conditions will lose their health insurance if the Trump administration wins an Obamacare case set to be argued at the U.S. Supreme Court November 10th. This is false. Republican attorneys general are asking the Supreme Court to strike down the Affordable Care Act. They contend that after federal lawmakers in 2017 zeroed out the individual mandate's penalty for lacking health insurance, the entire Affordable Care Act was rendered null and void. But there's a bipartisan consensus that any healthcare system we implement must protect people with pre-existing conditions. The 180 million Americans who have insurance through their employers automatically get their pre-existing conditions covered because of a law passed in the 1990s. This encompasses 90% of Americans with private health coverage. Part of the argument put forward by those supporting the passage of Obamacare was that people seeking individual insurance policies were sometimes denied coverage for their pre-existing conditions. The Affordable Care Act was supposed to fix this by requiring that all policies cover pre-existing conditions. But if you can't afford insurance coverage, that guarantee doesn't help you. According to Seema Verma, administrator for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Obamacare created a new class of uninsured, none of whom have the slightest protection against their pre-existing conditions. She explains in an article for National Review, after premiums doubled and even tripled in some states, once Obamacare regulations took effect, individual market coverage became unaffordable and unusable for millions of middle-class and self-employed Americans earning too much to qualify for subsidies. President Trump recently unveiled his America First healthcare plan, parts of which are already operational via executive order. It makes healthcare less expensive and emphasizes coverage of pre-existing conditions. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to know a little bit more about this article we're going to be talking about, it's the third article. It's entitled Twitter's Censorship Method, and that is a very good piece that appeared in the Wall Street Journal. I've got some others here about the Senate grills big tech for censoring conservatives. Interesting enough, Representative Dan Crenshaw had a very good Twitter post in which he said Jack Dorsey is a partisan and a hypocrite, and there are no liberals left in the Democratic Party, which I thought was pretty strong stuff. But again, if you're not familiar, as we've talked about for the last 2 weeks, the decision was made at Twitter that we would not allow anybody that has a Twitter account to actually forward these articles that came from the New York Post, which now we have even independent verification for their accuracy. And so on Wednesday, the CEO of Twitter, who is Jack Dorsey, now with a beard that looks like something like a Bolshevik or ZZ Top, I'm not sure what's going on there, but nevertheless appeared before the Senate Commerce Committee, and it was kind of an online speech because he was on the screen. Ted Cruz did have quite a few things to say. So Kelly Shackelford and Merrill Matthews, want to hear both of your comments about this.
You know, it reminded me of like something, from the book 1984. It's like the double speak, I mean, they were asking him basic questions, and it was like he lived in an alternative universe in a lot of ways. It was like he looked like, he had just come out of a cave somewhere, but his answers were that way too. Oh, any answers for why that you're only, censoring conservatives, but there's no liberals you've ever censored, and, acting like that didn't occur, acting like they're not censoring, acting like they're not affecting the election. It was crazy. And I think that it is that they just feel like, nobody can do anything to us because you're not going to pass anything through the Congress because we bought enough congressmen to not allow it through. And I think they feel like they can just get up there and just, as long as they don't say much, they can get away with it. But the American people, are watching what's happening. I mean, they have taken the fourth largest newspaper in the country and banned them from Twitter because they had information that was not favorable to Twitter's favorite political candidate. Facebook has a what is it called? A hate speech team that includes like 12 Chinese communists who are a part of their team figuring out what to ban from Americans. I mean, the stuff that's going on right now is really creepy. Now, Section 230, which is what they're after, is this ridiculous provision now that allows them immunity from lawsuit, Facebook and Twitter, because they were supposed to be just platforms that just provided other people a right to speak. But now they're censoring, so they're no longer a content-neutral platform, and they really need to change that so that people can bring lawsuits against them. I think that's going to be really hard. I think the more likely thing that is going to finally get them under control is the antitrust, which the federal government has now started. Of course, the problem will be if Biden does win the election, I think that'll probably be over. If Trump wins the election, I think then it'll be a real issue because it's the Justice Department under his leadership that has actually gone after these people and saying, you have a monopoly, and this is dangerous that you're controlling all of our communication.
It wasn't that long ago, I think about 2 years ago, that Jack Dorsey, I think, went to Chick-fil-A and came back and said and tweeted something about how he had a good sandwich or something at Chick-fil-A, and he got hammered so badly he ended up apologizing.
Yes,
he was
cancel culture.
He was a target of cancel culture, and now in some ways he's becoming a cancel culture. But it's interesting because we talk about conservatives who are angry at these, but liberals are as well. Mm-hmm. They feel like they're not being as strict as they should be on this. So I don't know where this goes, but I would wave a red flag to the tech companies. You've got liberals and conservatives upset with you, and you're going to get some legislation against you if you're not careful, because there's a lot of people who are upset.
Let me just mention real quickly that you work with a group called the Institute for Policy Innovation and IPI.org. I know you and Bartlett Cleland and some of the others have been writing about this, and you even did a while back a very significant kind of video and interaction, because this is something, again, that people say, is there anything we can do? And you've got some suggestions. Of course, Kelly has some other ones. But again, I encourage you to go not only to First Liberty, but IPI.org.
Yeah, this is a serious issue because if we lose our ability to communicate, I think what's going on right now is an election violation. I think that, under the law, people on Twitter and Facebook can go to jail because they're making massive in-kind political contributions to particular political candidates, in particular Biden over Trump. Again, if people don't know because they hadn't seen the news on the New York Post. The New York Post is the one who's broken this story about Hunter Biden doing business with China and these other places where actually there's now emails. He left a laptop and it had all the evidence on it. And it shows that certainly the whole Biden family, Hunter Biden, his brother, Joe Biden's brother, a number of them were getting paid because of access to the vice president. And there's even evidence that looks pretty strong that Joe Biden was participating. And in fact, now their reaction to this was, well, this is just Russian disinformation, which turns out to be completely false. In fact, the business partner in this venture has now come forward with his text messages and emails and his own testimony that shows this is a real issue.
It makes it look actually worse than what we thought with the emails.
It is.
Oh, yes. Much worse.
And the FBI, it's now come out that the FBI has actually had them under a money laundering investigation, Biden and them. And so this is a huge story. I mean, China is our biggest competitor, and they're flowing, all this money to the Biden family. This should come out in the election, but instead, it not only is it not coming out, Twitter and Facebook are banning. I mean, Twitter is banning their account of the fourth largest newspaper in the country. This is insane, but it just shows the danger. I mean, we're coming something like what we used to see with the Soviet Union, in Pravda. I mean, this is the government controlling our information, but except it's some really weird people controlling it from Silicon Valley. It's almost even worse, if it can get worse.
Well, and again, we're talking about Joe Biden and Jim Biden, who's the brother, but then all sorts of stuff with Hunter Biden. And what I mentioned earlier in the week is one of the things that's trending on Google are the people typing in, "Can I change my vote?" And they found, interestingly enough, the producer for Shannon Bream actually said that it looks like it's linked to people that have typed in Hunter Biden and then typed in, "Can I change my vote?" Turns out in about a half a dozen states, yes, you can do that, which is amazing to me. I did not know
you could do that.
I did not know that until earlier in the week, but I found that out to be.
I don't know how you do that, because they'd have to know who you voted for.
Yeah, well, you go in and vote that day. You'd have to vote this Tuesday, and then it would invalidate the one before. You'd have to tell them that. But anyway,
if you voted? What if you told them you voted and you end up getting 2 votes out of that?
That's the thing Rush Limbaugh was talking about. It's not going to happen, but the point is that it shows, I think, the danger of letting people vote before the second debate.
Yes. Yeah,
and even
sad.
more so now because, well, after we come back from the break, there was this organization founded by Glenn Greenwald called Intercept, and that's our 4th article on the website. And this was one to really be free from all the partisan and financial pressures. And now he's resigned because, after all, his editors wouldn't even let him post information about that. And so another great example of media groupthink. So we've got a lot more to cover. Dr. Merrill Matthews, Kelly Shackelford, and we'll cover that right after these important messages.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to spend some time looking at some of the issues in the news, and in particular, kind of a media groupthink. We just talked about Twitter, but let me jump in real quickly before we do that and mention that we now have up on the website, if you go to pointofview.net, the middle section there says Take Action, and it has Amy Coney Barrett, too controversial for the Girl Scouts and for Kappa Delta, and whether or not the Girl Scouts and Kappa Delta cave to the woke mob. If you click on that, what it does is give you some education, because some of you might say, okay, I don't know all about this, and we actually show you the picture of the original, I think, very positive tweet that came out from the Girl Scouts, in which they spent some time talking about all of the female Supreme Court justices, two that are no longer alive, Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the two that are sitting there right now, Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor, and the addition of Amy Coney Barrett. And so then we give you a chance to just add your name to a petition we will send to both these organizations. But of course, we also will, once you do that, try to get you some other information. You might want to, if you, for example, are a sorority sister of hers, maybe you actually are a KD and you wanted to express your opinion to Kappa Delta directly, or tell them about whether or not you want to contribute to that, or get a subscription or cancel your subscription to the Angelos, or whatever it might be. Or some of you might want to express your opinion to the Girl Scouts and say whether or not you're going to buy Girl Scout cookies in the future and all that. So we'll give you more information, but at least it's up there. So if you said, I want to do something, okay, we've made it pretty easy for you to do something quickly. And as time goes on, maybe we'll find out some other ways that we can maybe push back against the woke mob. And the point that you make, Kelly, is good. What we see so far is every time this media mob raises any concerns, the various companies, I don't care if they're a Fortune 500 company or a nonprofit organization or whatever, they all just back down. And one of the few things I think all of us learned in the schoolyard is if you back down to a bully, you get more bullying.
That's
right?
Exactly right. That's exactly right. We're going to get more of this in our cultures. Really gonna, I mean, we're already seeing it, right? I mean, this is, it leads to very bad things for a country. So as Christians, we understand, when people are bullying and when people are being fair and not fair. And again, the way John Piper and Wayne Grudem had a very, strong disagreement over the elections is exactly how things can be done. But that it won't be done that way if we allow these, unbalanced people to rule the day. I mean, people have to stand up and say, no. If you're the Girl Scouts, it's like there's nothing wrong with a picture of the 5 women who've been on the Supreme Court, including Amy Coney Barrett. If you've got a problem with this, it's your problem. There's nothing wrong with treating Amy Coney Barrett like every other woman you've treated before.
There's been this notion around about the shy Trump voter, the Trump voter who won't say that I vote for Trump because they're afraid of the reaction they'll get from other people. And it's things like this that make me think that this is, I've sort of thought it is a factor out there. It may be a bigger factor than we're really recognizing, because I know people who simply, they said, I won't go on Facebook and say anything because if I say something about conservative economics, I'm glad the economy's doing well or something, I just get attacked out there.
Yeah. Well, all three of us get attacked, and we know what it's like. But, one of the things that Dennis Prager has said more than once, and he said it recently in his fireside chats, is if there is one human trait that's in short supply, it's courage. And it is really so essential to the others. I mean, if somebody has integrity and honesty and fair play and they're gracious and all the rest, that all is helpful. But if you aren't afraid to actually stand up for the things you believe in, that's certainly the issue there. And the lack of courage on the part of these two organizations, which very quickly capitulated to the woke mob, means that, well, maybe we can. And Kelly, you taught me this years ago, because you sometimes would go into a particular school district and the principal says, well, I can't allow this religious event to take place because the ACLU might sue me. And what you would say is, you know what, if you don't do this, I will sue you, and I win most of the time.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
You got to respond, and the result of that was, why don't you just follow the law?
Yeah.
And in this case, with the KDs, with the Girl Scouts, why don't you just act in a fair and right way?
Yeah.
And if people criticize you, realize that it is these people who have the problem because they're being unfair and discriminatory. What they did wasn't unfair and discriminatory. They're, again, if maybe, is this just a female thing? I mean, for instance, if let's say Joe Biden or whoever is in a fraternity and they win the presidency, I mean, are fraternities not going to mention that they're a member of their fraternity? I kind of think they will, And if somebody says, oh, my feelings are hurt, I have a feeling in the fraternity they'll say, well, that's your problem. Get lost, buddy. Get a backbone, you know?
That's right.
So I don't know if it's just a female thing, but it's wrong either way.
So, again, we have that available for you, but let's get back to the media. Kelly, you were making the case that this almost sounds like the Soviet Union hearing Jack Dorsey, but the one that shocked me, and this is now the fourth article, is Glenn Greenwald. Now, we're not talking about somebody that agrees with us politically at all, but I saw him on Twitter, and most importantly, I saw him on Tucker Carlson, and he almost sounds like a rank conservative because he started this organization called Intercept, and the goal was to try to have a news outlet that was completely insulated from partisan pressures and financial pressures. And then Dr. Merrill Matthews, let me come to you because, we've posted here his resignation letter. He's upset because his editors simply said, I'm not going to let you talk about Joe Biden. I'm not going to let you talk about some of the controversy and really the corruption in the Biden family. And so he said, see ya.
He's covering it as a news story, and his editors apparently didn't want him doing that. The chief editor of The Intercept came out and said, well, he was just upset because we were just exercising general editorial control over things as people do with their writers. Sure. And then, as I understand the article, he's released some of the emails which imply that it really wasn't just, because those of us who write, when you write for major publications, they oftentimes want to adjust this or that. They have their own writing style and some other things. That's standard practice. But he did not feel that was the case, and apparently some of the emails he's released sort of support his taking on this. And in fact, it's just one more act. But it's just amazing how he lost control over an organization he started.
Yes,
and they're going to cancel him.
If you want any illustration to just how much there's a media blackout right now, Kelly, it's just unbelievable. We're living in unprecedented times.
We are, and that's there's been some friends of mine who've been doing some polling, and they said for the first time ever in the polling, the number one concern of Americans is the fake media. The fact that we don't have any media anymore that are doing their job as journalists and just trying to objectively, everybody's got their own biases, but trying to objectively present the information. We've lost that, and I think people know how dangerous that is and how that, the good news is I think there's an economic opportunity out there for people who really do want to be real journalists and have real news organizations, because people are looking for something that they can actually rely upon that's not trying to put their thumb on the scale.
Let's take a break, and I'll just mention this briefly because it's another article. We were told that Anonymous was a senior administration official. Turned out not to be the case. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Why are suicides surging in America? There's no easy answer to that question, but there are some important clues. Some of the answers have been put forth in the latest CDC reports. We do have a number of deaths of despair that result from intended suicides as well as from opioid overdoses. And we also see suicides that have increased among our veterans that show the relationship between military combat and PTSD. But there are social, intellectual, and spiritual reasons for the increased number of suicides. In her article in Intellectual Takeout, Annie Holmquist wonders what is driving this mentality of despair. She reminds us that half the people who commit suicide do not have a known mental health condition. That is why looking at other issues is so important. She takes us back to the seminal book by University of Chicago professor Alan Bloom, The Closing of the American Mind. Even back in 1988, when the book was published, he saw a stark difference between the college students of that day and those just a few years before. They were superficial and continually indulged in cliches. They didn't reason on a deeper level and were disenchanted with the world. Believe me, if that was true of the college students in the 1980s, it is really true of the current generation of young people. They have grown up in a world of memes and cliches. They came of age in a world that long abandoned moral values. The recent discussion about D-Day and the greatest generation led many to suggest that the current generation might not be up to such challenges. Sadly, this generation is growing up without any appeal to moral and biblical values. They don't have anything to live for because they don't believe anything would be worth dying for. Suicide becomes an option when life is sterile, superficial, and soulless. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Racism, go to viewpoints.info/racism. That's viewpoints.info/racism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention that the sixth article, yes, we have that many today, is on the issue of Anonymous. Now, you might remember, if you have certainly been kind of in the news cycle for the last couple of years, that there was a piece that appeared in the New York Times by an individual that was called Anonymous. Now, there was all sorts of speculation who this was. You know, some people said, well, maybe it's Mike Pence. Well, no. Maybe it was James Mattis, who at that time was Secretary of Defense. Maybe it's Jared Kushner or Victoria Coates. Some, I think, speculated, well, it might have been John Huntsman, ambassador to Russia, something like that. Turns out it was a man by the name of Miles Taylor, who was a cabinet secretary, not a senior administration official. I love Greg Jarrett's best line here. He said, you know, anybody who actually comes on the record as anonymous oftentimes is a coward anyway. But Miles Taylor was a distant, disconnected figure who pretended to be some prominent Trump administration insider. His tweet today shows he's also a grammatical idiot. But nevertheless, this has created, and Kelly, you put this together, and I was thinking it was really good, showed me this. This is a list from liberals, conservatives, people that work for ABC, CBS, CNN, Fox News, Huffington Post, and to a person, they're all just saying this is an incredible embarrassment.
It is an embarrassment, but it's because we've dropped all the journalistic standards. You know, in the past, I think we've all forgotten this. We didn't do anonymous. I mean, it wasn't allowed. Yeah. It wasn't allowed. Mm-mm. This is only in the last, 3 years? It was only with Trump that it became okay. You know, you had to have real sources, and they had to come forward. Now, you might have an anonymous person,
a deep throat. But you had to confirm it.
You had to have confirmation. And what we've seen, especially with the Russia, scandal with Clinton, with Trump, what we saw is a lot of these anonymous things were just lies. And they're destroying journalism. And really, I don't know how we get back to.
I don't either.
But I think Americans really want good journalism. They don't want these lies. They want to be able to, if you're an American, I talk to people about this all the time. Where do you go? Right? The best I hear is people will go, well, I'll go to Fox and then I'll go to, CNN and I'll try to figure out between the two of them. But that's not, we really need people who are being real journalists, right? Who are really going to, obviously people have their own biases, but they're trying not to. They're trying to do it objectively and maybe to have balance within their own network, studio, whatever, to try to provide both sides so that people actually know what's going on. This kind of stuff now with this Hunter Biden, Biden family corruption situation where they're actually under investigation for the last year by the FBI, and that's come out, where most of the country doesn't see this. This is just it's not our country. We're losing, the freedom of the press without even the government doing anything. We're losing our press. And I think there's a great opportunity. I've always thought this for years, that you could start a news station, whatever it is, by hiring based upon political ideology to make sure that you have diversity throughout your organization and making sure that you're covering all the stories that people are interested in, or they should be, and that you're having both sides. It seems like there's a real opening there for somebody to make a lot of money.
There used to be a day when journalists would cover these stories because, that's how you won a Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah,
that's how you won the various investigative awards that were given out there. And now I think you're probably canceled if you're doing something like that. It's amazing that that's happening. And the sad part about it, the public has become so skewed to this, and the journalists know it. They know that that's what they're doing. So that when Tom Cotton's piece ran in the New York Times,
here's a good example. Yeah,
he got the media, the reporters and so forth had at the New York Times. Was it Washington Post?
No, New York Times.
It was New York Times.
Yeah, they had an uprising. They ended up having the editor had to leave, and
she left. Yeah,
other things that happened because of putting forth a thing from a sitting senator.
Yep.
That's and I know it sounds self-serving, but one of the reasons why I know a lot of people listen to Point of View, because they simply said, we don't have an agenda. I don't have a dog in the hunt on a lot of these stories. I'll just tell you what I think, and whether or not somebody's going to win or lose, those are the stories out there, and there's nothing off the table, right?
Right, and in fact, you're reminding me. So I'm asking you on air. So are we going to all predict what's going to happen in the elections? Is this the last? Before next week when the final votes, I just wondered, so are you going to be on the line and everybody's going to tape record what you say, Kirby, to kind of keep you to what you think is going to happen? And
I was going to go to the election because we had two things here. We got how third-party candidates might determine the presidency, and how the minorities, how blacks and Hispanics might. So we got a couple of those stories, and I did want to get some predictions from all three of us around the table as that. But let me take one of those pieces, and that is Dr. Merrill Matthews. This just appeared in The Hill, and so it's just now appearing on our website, just now appearing at The Hill. Could blacks and Hispanics hand Trump a November victory? And that is pretty striking, because we've had a couple of individuals on the program over the last couple of months that have said, I don't think the polls understand the remarkable shift in the black vote towards Donald Trump. You notice that Donald Trump certainly was trying to attract that at the Republican National Convention. And if last time Donald Trump got all of 8% of the black vote and won, and now they're predicting what, 31%? Tell us more about this.
This is Rasmussen's poll that was released yesterday, and this was over several days. And so they did a daily tracking of what I think they call the daily black voter likely voter, black voter. And it was earlier in the week, it was around 29%. Up to yesterday, it was 31%. And what's remarkable about this is back a year ago, back last December, we were talking about this because 3 polls came out at the time, and I cite them in the piece. There's links to that. 3 polls came out at the time that had black favorability, I believe it was at that time. I don't think they were asking about, are you going to plan to vote for him, around 30% for Donald Trump. And we were thought, this is amazing. This probably can't be true, but there's 3 polls, so it looks like it might be true. And that support has actually carried along pretty well over the past over the past year, such that even the New York Times has been running stories saying Democrats better go back and look because they're losing some black and Hispanic support that would normally be supported for the Democrats. Democrats have had a long time lock on that vote. Donald Trump says, try me. What do you got to lose? And now you've got a number of major, especially African-American spokesmen who are out speaking up for Donald Trump. And it's an interesting shift because he's shuffled these traditional voting blocks in ways that you just don't really know what's going to happen on this.
Very true.
Like if the African-American vote comes out, 30% in favor of Trump, I think it's over. Yeah, the election's over.
That's what Tim Scott said. I think. What did he say? If it's even 14 to 16% of the black vote, it's game over. That's Senator Tim Scott. He might know something.
I think that's true, and I do think that I've been saying this for years, but I think if the black vote were to go out in a significant percentage, it would be incredibly beneficial for the black community because right now they're just kind of the lackey to the Democrats and. Nobody has to really play for them. Nobody has to offer things. Nobody, in politics, it's important if you're a constituency that could go either way because then they have to actually listen to what you're saying. I think if this happened, it would create a long-term increase in power in the black community with making sure politicians are listening to their concerns and are trying to meet those. So I think it would actually, be a really good thing. I'm not saying for this election or any election, if this happened, I think it would change things. Because right now, they're 90-something% every election for the Democratic candidate.
And so, again, part of that has to do with the swing of the black vote, because most people think that Donald Trump won the 20 electoral votes in Pennsylvania because of the black vote. Well, if that turnout is as high as it is, now we're getting into prediction time. Up until now, Charlie Cook has always said that Biden probably has lots of ways he can win, because it's assuming that Joe Biden is going to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Let me just take those 4 for a minute. There's got to be something going on because Donald Trump and Mike Pence have both gone to Minnesota. Well, when's the last time Minnesota voted for a Republican? I think it was 72, something like that. That's a long time ago. And so, again, and in Wisconsin, Michigan, the black vote might be the swing vote in any one or any 3 of those states. And if you can tell me who wins Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, I'll tell you the next president is right there. Yeah, so that's pretty significant.
It's a huge, and then the Hispanic vote is considered even, it's really been surprising too.
That's Florida for sure.
Even the first debate where everybody thought Trump was way too aggressive and interrupting, the Hispanic community, for whatever reason, loved it. They like an aggressive, kind of forceful leader. So you just never know how these things are shaking out.
Well, we'll make some predictions and even talk about the impact of third-party candidates right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. Kelly Shackelford, Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio with us. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. This will be the last time I have a chance to talk to these men about what might happen on Tuesday. They won't, unfortunately, be with us next Friday, so we'll get some thoughts. Also, we do have an article about how third-party candidates could determine the presidency. That's written by Sean Spicer. Remember Sean Spicer? And so we'll get into that.
He did a good job on that, too.
And I might just mention that anybody anybody thinks third-party candidates don't have an impact, Ross Perot in 1992.
19%.
Yes, or even the whole issue of Al Gore and Ralph Nader in 2000. So that's another issue we'll factor in as well. Started the program a while back with about 84 million people having already voted. Now the number is up to 85 million. So you can see ticket, almost every hour there are more and more. But let me come back to this piece, Dr. Merrill Matthews, that just appeared on the Hill, and we will have a link to it as well. And we talked about black and Hispanic. We had one individual, Sheila just called a minute ago, Hispanic herself, saying she feels like there's really worldwide Hispanic support for Donald Trump. There certainly is Israeli support for Donald Trump. They said 70% of Israelis love Donald Trump. But what about the Hispanic number? We've looked at the African American number from 8% to, I still have trouble saying 30% on the air, but I just did. What about this one? The Hispanic vote last time for Trump was about 28%,
about
right?
28%, yeah. And the polls seem to have him up higher. I've seen some in the 30s. Kelly saw one he thought was about 41%. And that, of course, goes against the narrative of Donald Trump is a racist and trying to do his best to keep Hispanics out of the country. Therefore, they're not going to vote for him. That doesn't seem to be the case at all. But the that notion that there's a long running notion that if Republicans got 20% of the African American vote, and I've got it cited in that Hill piece that comes from back around 1990-92 from the Journal of Political Science, that they would win. That's sort of assuming that you keep the other coalitions that you normally have. Now he's probably creating some challenges among women and maybe some suburban voters. At least that's what they're thinking. So it's not entirely clear that even if he does much better among African Americans and Hispanics, that will get him a victory, because he's lost some other constituencies, or at least lost some of the support in there. But this just fundamentally reshapes the parties if he actually does that well with those.
Yeah, this is fascinating. It really is. It's there's just so much going on right now, and I think most point of view listeners realize God is really at work. What just happened with the Supreme Court justice, how this is moving, how there are these really evil groups in the streets wanting to commit violence. There's clearly a shaking going on. And so as a result, there's a lot of the normal kind of, we thought it was exciting, but it's kind of bland now. The old bland politics of where people voted is shifting. And so, for instance, it used to be that the blue collar were Democrats, the people that worked in the factories, the people that had grease under their fingernails overall were more Democrat. They're now moving to Trump because they know he's actually fighting for their jobs, whereas Obama and Biden said, well, sorry, the manufacturing jobs we're just going to lose unless you think we have a magic wand. Okay, so it's clear what's happened with the NAFTA deal and the reworking of that, and the trade deals that he's fighting for those workers. But at the same time, that shifting is happening. You've got all the elites, the white, wealthier, college-educated women that don't like Trump, and they're moving Democrat. And so those aren't equal numbers in every state. And so as they start to both move from one part to the other, it creates all kinds of different states that maybe become now up for grabs or move from one side to the other. And I think everybody's looking at this not only for this election, but for what is happening long term and what that'll mean. So I don't think anybody really knows for sure on a number of these states. If I had to guess, I'd say the people that know the most, just Trump is a businessman. He has really good analytics people. And last time he seemed to know the numbers everywhere better than his opponent. Hillary Clinton wasn't going to Wisconsin. Meanwhile, he was going there and they thought he was nuts, and he wins Wisconsin, right? So I'd kind of watch where Trump is going to figure out where those states are that maybe, are in play, and maybe it's important that he go at the end.
And there's another factor here that we haven't discussed at all, and that's the enthusiasm factor. That's right. I will take a stand on this. There is no one, except for Hunter Biden, who really wants Joe Biden to win the presidency.
That's right.
Most of Joe Biden supporters are either, I wish I could get Bernie Sanders, but I can't because he's not on there, or I really dislike Donald Trump, so I'm voting for Joe Biden instead of Donald Trump. But when you look at the crowds that are showing up for for Trump, I mean, these are huge, excited crowds. There's groups. I think you sent a piece around about Facebook on people who are do these caravans of thousands of cars that are supporting Donald Trump. It's amazing the kind of excitement that he gets, and there's virtually nobody like that for Joe Biden. And I don't know how that plays out, but typically the excited voter is going to vote.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that, again, Trump's got his issues that some people are never going to vote for Trump because they don't like him. He's kind of an abrupt, rude New Yorker. He's not mannerly, and all these kind of things. He used to have, sexual infidelity problems. It appears that in the last 4 years, there's been no stories. And if something would have happened, it would have come out. So, but he's still got those issues where people are not going to go for him. But the things I think that are going for him right now at the end is, number one, what usually is the most important, which is the economy. This GDP surge of 33%, which is the largest ever in the history of the country, and really almost, not completely, but almost erasing everything that we had lost in the lockdowns in a short period of time. Most people are more caring about, do I have a job? Do I get a paycheck? Can I take care of my family? And that's moving in a really good direction here right before the election. And if you change to Joe Biden, he's going to change everything. Now, you don't know how far on the progressive he's going to go. Is he going to push the Green New Deal? Is he going to, what are these really extreme things that really do hurt the economy? He's clearly said he's going to cancel the tax cuts. But that's a big one. And then the other one is the coronavirus. Trump is for keeping things open. And again, on the Biden side, they would say he's not safe. He's not taking care of people, right? But on the other side, Biden is for shutting things down. And again, I think overall, I just heard of a polling today that young people were moving towards Trump as far as the numbers. Not that it was going to be a majority, but those numbers were moving in Trump's direction because they want to work. And they need to work. And they don't need things shut down. And so I think those are the advantages for Trump, is the economy and the shutdown issues, whereas Biden's really camping on Trump is rude, his character's bad. By the way, I think the character's a wash at this point in light of all the stories about the Biden family and all the money they've been getting. I think the character's a wash. But I think the Biden other argument is character and we'll be safer on the pandemic. And so, but that also tells you something about shutdown. And I think that's to Trump's advantage overall right now.
Let me just mention that second article, which I have explained, but I'll do it again. We hardly ever post something from the White House. We usually find something from the Associated Press, Washington Post, New York Times, whatever. And Kelly, one of the reasons we did this, because you had pointed it in the right directions. First of all, it gives some accurate figures. If anybody wants to see what it looks like to see a V-shaped recovery, that's the case. But one of the reasons we ended up using this one is because the mainstream press just wasn't willing to just tell the truth without adding a but or a disclaimer or something like that, right?
Yeah, it was ridiculous. The headlines were just ridiculous. It's just what we talked about earlier about the press not being able to just get out of the way and just report facts. I mean, it was like one of them was, record number GDP growth, but coronavirus still not overcome. It's like, you really didn't have to put the last point in there. You could just report what's going on. It was crazy. You couldn't find it in any newspaper. They all had to add something negative, even if it didn't have to do with the news we had just gotten, which should be good for every American. Should be excited. Whoever's going to be president, the economy has been turned around and it's moving fast in the right direction. That should be good news we can all celebrate. But
I would think so.
Not now, not right before the election.
Well, just before we take a break, let me just set up that after the break, I would like to talk about this idea of third-party candidates. And we mentioned that the other day. That is one of the other articles by Sean Spicer. And the only third-party candidate that's in all 50 states would be the Libertarian Party, Joe Jorgensen. But you have others that in various states could have an impact. The Green Party. Would you vote for the Green Party, Howard Hawkins, instead of Joe Biden because you really believe in the Green New Deal? Or the Party for Socialism and Liberalism. They used to be the Communist Party, but now you already have that with them. And all the way down, you got the Constitution Party, the Independence Party. And then you got Kanye West, the birthday party, and the American Solidarity Party, Brian Carroll. So what about the third party? Will that have an impact? It has before. We'll talk about that right after this.
Coverage of pre-existing health conditions has been a hot button in presidential debates and Senate hearings for a Supreme Court nominee. In one debate, Joe Biden argued that 100 million people who have pre-existing conditions will lose their health insurance if the Trump administration wins an Obamacare case set to be argued at the U.S. Supreme Court November 10th. This is false. Republican attorneys general are asking the Supreme Court to strike down the Affordable Care Act. They contend that after federal lawmakers in 2017 zeroed out the individual mandate's penalty for lacking health insurance, the entire Affordable Care Act was rendered null and void. But there's a bipartisan consensus that any healthcare system we implement must protect people with pre-existing conditions. The 180 million Americans who have insurance through their employers automatically get their pre-existing conditions covered because of a law passed in the 1990s. This encompasses 90% of Americans with private health coverage. Part of the argument put forward by those supporting the passage of Obamacare was that people seeking individual insurance policies were sometimes denied coverage for their pre-existing conditions. The Affordable Care Act was supposed to fix this by requiring that all policies cover pre-existing conditions. But if you can't afford insurance coverage, that guarantee doesn't help you. According to Seema Verma, administrator for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Obamacare created a new class of uninsured, none of whom had the slightest protection against their pre-existing conditions. She explains in an article for National Review, after premiums doubled and even tripled in some states, once Obamacare regulations took effect, individual market coverage became unaffordable and unusable for millions of middle-class and self-employed Americans earning too much to qualify for subsidies. President Trump recently unveiled his America First healthcare plan, parts of which are already operational via executive order. It makes healthcare less expensive and emphasizes coverage of pre-existing conditions. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Here for a few more minutes, and again, around the round table, I want to get some predictions and some thoughts about this. Kelly Shackelford, Merrill Matthews, but our last article, or one of our, I guess it's the second last article now, is one on third-party candidates, and it's written by Sean Spicer. And back in 2016, if you look at the numbers, Jill Stein, the Green Party's nominee, and Gary Johnson, the Libertarian nominee, they played a role in some of the states. And even if you go to like Utah, Evan McMillan actually played a role there as well. Not the kind of role that, say, Ralph Nader did in 2000 or that Ross Perot did in 1992, but it is something to pay attention to. Any thoughts about third-party candidates?
Yeah, they're not getting nearly the coverage this time that they did last time. So it's not clear to me. And you know what you expect on sort of like the Green Party candidate, those people who just on the left who just simply they think Joe Biden is too moderate, might go that direction, but I don't really expect that to happen because they think Kamala Harris is waiting in the wings.
Right.
And so if I don't get the man I want initially, I'm going to get her pretty quickly. So I don't have a feel for that from the third party candidates. They sometimes play a role. As as you point out, especially with Ross Perot in 1992. And John Anderson, remember John Anderson out there?
Should have mentioned that one too. And I will say that I'm virtually confident that a third-party candidate will play a role in Georgia, because you have to have 50% of the vote, and for sure the special election, I'm sure, will go into overtime, and you won't have that runoff till January 5th.
Talking about the Senate seat.
Yes. Right? And then when we talk about the other Senate seat, David Perdue, if he gets 50%, no, maybe not, but it's possible that either or both of those Senate seats in Georgia, which brings me to the Senate, because that gets us into the issue of court packing. Kelly, we haven't talked about that yet.
Yeah, this is, I think, one of the biggest things in the election that people are not noticing, and that is that Joe Biden has been really pushed. His base really wants court packing. If those who don't know what that is, it's when you don't like what the Supreme Court is doing, and so you as a party decide, well, yeah, I know it's been 150 years that we've had 9 justices, but since the number isn't in the Constitution, we'll just add 4 or 5 justices and make sure they're liberal, and that way we'll get the results we want. FDR tried this. It did not work out well, because the people realized very quickly what this would mean, that if you do that, then when the Republicans come in, they add 5 justices. And then when the Democrats come in, they add 5 justices. And you destroy the United States Supreme Court. It is no longer a legal body. It is now a political body. It is an adjunct to the Congress. And you've destroyed one of the branches of government we have. And every one of your rights, whatever right you care about, whether it's the right to own a firearm, the right to free speech, the right to assembly, you name it, it's now no longer a right. It's simply a privilege that the ruling party can decide whether you keep or not. And most Americans hate this idea. Even the independents are 2-1 against it. And that's why Biden won't commit to what he's going to do, because he knows if he does, if he goes one way, he's going to anger his base. And if he goes the other way, he's going to anger a lot of voters. And so he's putting this to a commission.
Which is the way you punt on an issue.
Yeah, so this is really important, because that will ultimately be decided not only by the presidency, but by the Senate.
Yes.
But let's also mention Senate packing.
Yes.
Because there is a proposal out there among Democrats to make both D.C., District of Columbia, where Washington is, and Puerto Rico states, giving them each 2 new senators, which would be 4 new senators. They're very left-leaning groups, so you'd likely have 4 new Democratic senators, and that's another way you might end up being able to get what you want done in Senate packing.
So it's really important, not only the presidency, but who controls the Senate, because in order to get court packing, number one, you not only have to have the House and the Senate, which, let's say it's Democrats, let's say it's Joe Biden, and you get the House and the Senate. That Senate would then also have to destroy the filibuster, which would be a really bad thing for our country, because we'd be jerking every 2 years one direction and the other. We've had that to make sure that you have to at least have 60 votes in the Senate to bring something up for a vote, which has moderated things to where we have some bipartisanship. So that's what the Senate's really about. They had to get rid of the filibuster, force this through, and it would really end our Supreme Court. And again, that's a pretty major thing, and it's not being talked about very much. But I think it will depend. It'll become very relevant if Biden wins and the Democrats have the House and the Senate, and that's why a lot of people are really paying close attention to the Senate.
I think so, because, you've heard the phrase fundamentally transform America.
Yeah,
that would fundamentally transform America in terms of that. And again, we'll watch some of those. Arizona's one that we're watching. In Maine, I do wonder whether or not Republicans will be elected in that regard. I think there's a Republican pickup in Alabama. So then it gets down to North Carolina, gets to Iowa, Montana, a couple of others like that. And nevertheless, that's very important. And if it's even close, like I said, it's pretty certain that at least one of the races in Georgia won't be decided till January 5th. So it's kind of intriguing. So around the round table, what are your thoughts? I mean, do we have a possibility for Donald Trump to win re-election, or is it a given conclusion on the part of almost everybody in the mainstream media that Joe Biden has a clear path to 270 electoral votes?
Yeah, I don't think anybody knows. Because they don't know if the polling is accurate or not. It was so off last time. It seems to be off this time in light of other things you're seeing. So, I mean, literally, I think you could wake up or not wake up. Either way, you could be up that night. It could be a landslide for either side, and that wouldn't be totally shocking, right? Or I think it's more likely, and I think this is the general consensus, is that it'll probably be close, and we're going to be in a long, legal. Well, I don't know how long, but we'll be in a legal battle over the election. I hope not, but it could be either way. My only thing is, I don't think the guy ever could have won president last time, and God put him in there. And so I figure if God wants him in there again, he'll put him in there. And if he doesn't, he doesn't. And so I'm just going to I'm going to do my part, go and vote, which I already have, early voted. And I hope everybody will go and vote. But ultimately, I'm glad that this is in the Lord's hands.
Well, the week before the election in 2016, everybody had Hillary Clinton measuring the drapes for the White House.
Right.
And but Donald Trump was coming back. You could see it in the polls. He was starting to make a little comeback, and it was just enough to get him over. Mm-hmm. And it wouldn't surprise me if we don't see something like that again. I don't know that I wouldn't hold my breath on it. If you're a betting person, you probably want to go with Joe Biden, but I suspect it's only a 55% chance and a 45% Trump.
And again, almost 86 million people have already voted.
Yep.
Last time, 138 million voted. I think we're going to be up to 140 million, but still, you recognize just a very high percentage. Mm-hmm. Kelly and I live in Collin County, and we have more than 60, almost 65% of the people already voted in that particular county we live in. So a lot of that's already been decided in some way or another, but we still have these absentee ballots that could arrive late. And again,
in key states.
Like Pennsylvania. So, nevertheless, we certainly encourage you to pray, and we also encourage you to vote, and most importantly, we encourage you to go to the website. We have posted an enormous number of articles ranging from religious liberty, some of the economic recovery, some of the questions about media, third-party candidates. It's all right there. And if you want to know more, go to firstliberty.org and ipi.org. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate both of you being with us, and we'll know soon enough we thought, if this time next week when I have a roundtable discussion, we're still wondering what's going to happen in the Senate and the House and even the presidency, it's going to be crazy. So that's all we have for today. I would encourage you to find some more information if you'd like to act on that issue of Amy Coney Barrett and the Girl Scouts in Kappa Delta. It's all on our website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday on Point of View.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.